Hello my fellow artists and friends. Today we are going to begin a fiber art project. Fiber arts means any type of art that is created using thread, yarn, fabric, sewing, felting, or string art is included in fiber arts. We are going to be dyeing our own fabric in the style of Japanese Shibori artists. Shibori is an art form that comes from Japan, and it is a way to dye fabric using indigo dyes and tying the fabric in many different ways to create patterns on that fabric. We are not going to be doing the exact same thing as Shibori artists do. We are going to do a classroom version of Shibori, but it's going to look amazing. One other interesting thing about this project is that it's going to be fine art, but it's also going to be a useful item. Another word for this is that this art is functional art. So you can give your Shibori dyed pillow to a friend or loved one. You could keep it for yourself and use it to help you sleep. It's going to be beautiful, but it's also going to be useful or functional. So let's get this functional art project started. You will receive two 10-inch square pieces of muslin fabric. You need to pick out some Sharpie colors. I suggest sticking to the color families: warm colors, cool colors, or neutral colors. And the first thing we need to do is take each of our pieces of muslin one at a time and fold them to create a pattern. So everyone is going to take the muslin fabric and fold it in half once. You're going to crease the edge of the fabric just like you would with paper. That way it'll stay down better. After that, fold the fabric in half once again and crease. Everybody everywhere has to start with those two folds, but now you can experiment a little bit. Let me show you some ideas for how to fold this fabric. For a triangular pattern, take the top corner of the rectangle of fabric and fold it down. Then flip over the fabric and fold it the opposite direction. And keep flipping the fabric back and forth to create an accordion-like fold until you reach the bottom of the fabric and it's all in a triangle. It's okay if you reach the end and everything is not matched up or lining up perfectly. It's totally okay. One thing you do not want to do is fold the fabric on itself like you're rolling up a carpet and you don't see any of the accordion folds. We do not want that. No. We want to make sure that when we're folding, we're flipping the fabric back and forth. Another idea is to use a rectangular fold. So instead of folding the fabric into triangles, you can flip it back and forth and simply fold it into rectangles like this. Now again, we do not want to roll it up on itself like this, like a carpet. That will not work. The center of your Shibori is going to be blank because it's too folded up on itself. Another option is to take the rectangle and fold it once again into an even thinner rectangle and add triangular or rectangular folds from here. And notice that every time I do a fold, I flip the fabric over and back again. After you've finished one of your muslin pieces, clothespin it so that it stays folded. And then maybe choose a different folding pattern for your second piece of muslin, or if you want two matching sides to your pillow, make it the same. And pin when you're done. After your two pieces of muslin fabric are all folded up properly using the back and forth method and pinned so that they stay in place, now it's time to use the Sharpies that you chose. On each edge of your folded muslin, put a large amount of Sharpie ink. Make sure that you go in between each one of the folds of the muslin and make sure that you get a lot of ink onto the fabric. The way you can do this is by letting the marker sit on the fabric for a couple of seconds, and it will soak up the ink from the Sharpie. The more ink you have on your fabric, the brighter and more vibrant your Shibori die will be. After you've finished one side, it's time to move on to the next side. You might consider changing colors or not. But remember to make sure that you color in between each of the folds on the top and the bottom and the edge, and make sure that you get a lot of ink onto the fabric. Once you finish the second side, of course, move on to side number 3. And for the last side of the fabric, you're going to have to move the clothespin to a different side so that you can reach it. After you're done coloring all the sides of one of your Shibori fabrics, don't forget to do the other one. You do have two pieces that you're working with. Make sure that they both get fully colored with plenty of ink. Once you think you're all done, you need to double check all of the folds and in between spaces of the folded muslin, because you might have missed something. Like I honestly missed coloring in this whole section, and I didn't realize it until I did a double check. So if you think you're all done coloring, do a double check. Look at each side of the fabric and open the accordion folds to make sure that you got in between every fold. Once you've done your double check and you have confirmed that you've colored in between every single fold of the muslin, it's time to activate the dye or activate the ink. You will be receiving a small bowl with rubbing alcohol inside. To activate the dye, all you need to do is dip each edge of the muslin into the alcohol. Once you reach the fourth side where the clothespin is blocking it, you're going to have to take a second and replace the clothespin on a different side so that you can dunk that side into the alcohol and activate that dye as well. Once your dye is fully activated with the alcohol, you will have a styrofoam plate with your name on it that you will be storing the fabric on as it dries. Make sure to activate both pieces of muslin to get the Shibori effect on both fabric pieces that you'll be using for the pillow, and make sure that both of those activated fabrics are placed on your styrofoam plate. Both of your pieces of folded and activated muslin fabric now need to sit for about a day or 24 hours in order to dry and allow the dye to seep through all the layers. Now it's time to see what happened with our Shibori magic dye, and to do that we will take off the clothespin and carefully unfold the fabric to see what patterns we made. So here's my triangular pattern. I really like it a lot. And let's check out my tiny rectangular pattern as well. I think this is my favorite. It looks almost like an animal print, and I think that the blues and greens work together so well. After you've unfolded and taken a peek at your Shibori die, it's time to sew these two pieces together. You are going to place one piece of fabric on top of the other, trying your best to match up the corners and edges. If your squares don't fit absolutely perfectly together, it's okay. Just try to line them up as best as your two unique pieces of fabric can line up. And then your table is going to get a box of push pins, and your job will be to pin the fabric together on 3 sides. Just in case you've never done this before, to pin something, you poke the pin down toward the table and back up through the fabric almost like a stitch. Next, just a little to the left or the right of the pin, do it again. Poke down toward the table and back up through both pieces of fabric to create a stitch-like effect. Continue this on 3 sides of the fabric, not all 4, just 3 sides, and that will help us keep the fabric together in the spot that we want it to be in as we start to sew. After you're done pinning 3 out of the 4 sides of our squares of fabric, it's time to thread a needle and start sewing. Up at the store, there will be a bundle of strings like this. Grab one of the strings out without messing up the rest of the bundle by grabbing one string from the knot and pulling one side out at a time. That way, the bundle still stays together, neat and tidy, but you got your string out and you don't have to cut each string by yourself. You can use the ones that I cut for you. Now it's time to thread the needle, and you might notice that it is really difficult to get this crochet thread through the eye of that needle because it keeps wanting to split up into its smaller fibers. So we will have at the store little needle threaders. They're just simply pieces of paper that are folded and are thin enough to fit through the eye of the needle. What you need to do is take your string and put it inside of the paper like a little hot dog. The paper is the hot dog bun and the string is like the hot dog. Once the string is laid inside the hot dog bun, pull the string so that the little hot dog end hides inside of the bun. Once you've done that, you are ready to thread your needle. You're going to take the needle threader, slide it through the eye of the needle, and since the paper's there, the string can't fray and split up into its smaller fibers. Pull the thread through the eye of the needle so that quite a bit is coming out. While we're sewing, it's really important that you hold on to the eye of the needle so that the end of that string doesn't come out. But if it does, just grab up your needle threader and re-thread the needle. After your needle has been threaded, it's time to tie a knot at the other end. So be careful to not unthread your needle, just lay it down on the table, and on the other end of the string, create a circle with the tail, and then tuck the tail into the circle, pulling both sides tightly to create a knot near the end of the string. This is going to stop the thread from going all the way through the fabric so that our stitches stay anchored. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a threaded and tied needle and thread, and we are ready to sew. Our job is to pick our favorite stitch. I'm going to show you 4 different stitch styles. Pick one or more that you would like to try and sew the 3 pinned sides of your pillow. The first stitch I'm going to show you is called a running stitch. It's the classic stitch that you always picture when you think of sewing. First, start from underneath the fabric and poke your needle through both pieces of fabric, pulling all the way to the knot. Next, poke the needle down towards the table about a centimeter away from where the needle came up, and pull until the loop becomes tight. Next, about a centimeter away from your last stitch, search with your needle to poke from the bottom of the fabric once again. Then we're going to go back down towards the table, about a centimeter away, and pull until the loop tightens. Now the hardest part is probably searching with your needle. But if you drag the pointy end of the needle across the fabric, you'll be able to see exactly where it is. And once it gets to the spot that you want it, poke it through. Another important thing to remember as you are creating your running stitch, and all of these stitches, is to make sure that you are pinching the eye of the needle so that you don't lose the thread. It's okay if you do accidentally let go of the thread and you pull the needle off of the thread. You're just gonna have to stop, get a needle threader, and thread that needle once again. So I'm gonna speed things up and I'm gonna finish this entire side of the pillow with a running stitch. Now what happens if you make a mistake? Like right here, I didn't sew the stitch through both pieces of fabric. So what do? What I need to do is actually take the needle off of the thread, and I need to use my needle to undo the bad stitch. Once the stitch is undone, then I can re-thread the needle and continue sewing. Another thing that you need to keep your eye on is how long of a thread left that you have to work with. Because as soon as the thread gets as short as your hand, then you must stop sewing. You need to tie off that thread and start with a new one. To do that, you need to look closely and find the last stitch that you made, which for me is right here. Once you found the last stitch that you made, slide your needle underneath and pull almost all the way through. Then backtrack and take the needle through the loop that appears and pull tightly. Let's give this a double knot. This time my needle is going to fly through the last stitch in the opposite direction. It's going to slide through the stitch almost all the way, except before I pull all the way out, I'm going to turn back and go through the loop. Now I can pull it all the way through tightly, and that knot is double knotted and it won't come out. The next step before you re-thread your needle with a new thread is to pick up some scissors and cut down close to the knot. After that, you're ready to go grab yourself another string from the store. Remember, gently pull one string from the knot, one side at a time. It'll come out of the bundle without ruining the whole bundle. Then pick up your needle threader and thread the needle. Remember, after your needle is threaded, you need to make sure to tie a knot on the other end of the string. Create a circle with the tail, pull the tail through the circle, and then pull both ends of the string to tighten the knot. Now you're ready to continue sewing. I'm going to teach you another type of stitch that you might want to try on your pillow, and this is called a back stitch. So a back stitch starts out exactly like a running stitch. You come in from underneath and sew over and under the fabric with spaces in between. So really quickly, I'm going to do a running stitch to get started. And I'm going to go across one of the pin sides of the fabric, getting new thread every single time that the thread gets shorter than my hand. Once that's done and I have a good running stitch to work off of, it's time to go backwards. This is why it's called a back stitch. So instead of being done, what I'm going to do is go back over my stitch and I'm going to fill in the spaces in between each one. So I dive down through the fabric, meeting up with the previous stitch. And the toughest part of the back stitch is searching with your needle to find where to poke through, which should be right at the end of this stitch. Once I find it, I can pull it back through and then jump over to the beginning of the next stitch and point my needle down toward the table. Watch it again. I'm going to search with my needle, and once I get really close to the end of the last stitch, I'm going to pull the needle through and then find the beginning of the very next stitch and pull my needle down toward the table. So a back stitch creates a more continuous line, whereas a running stitch has a lot of spaces in between each stitch. Let's watch just a couple more stitches in real time, and then I'll speed it up. Remember, when the string gets as short as your hand, it's time to re-thread the needle and tie it off. And if the needle falls off of the thread, pick up your needle threader and just re-thread the needle. My needle fell off, and so I need to re-thread it so that I can actually tie off this string. And remember to tie off the string so that it doesn't become unraveled. Take the needle through the last stitch that you made, and before pulling the needle all the way, go back through the loop that was created to tie a knot. And then switch direction, put the needle through the thread in the other direction. Before you pull it all the way and the loop disappears, take the needle back through the loop, pull it tight to create a double knot. Next, I'm going to show you another stitch. It's called the whip stitch, but first I need to pull out a fresh thread from the thread bundle, and I need to use my needle threader to put the thread through the needle and then tie a knot on the other end of the string. Then I'm ready to sew. So I'm working on side number 3 that has pins in it, and again, the stitch we're about to learn is called a whip stitch. To start the whip stitch, push your needle up through the bottom of your pillow and make sure that you go through both pieces of fabric. Pull the string all the way through until the knot stops it, and we're going to whip around the side of the pillow to go back underneath the fabric and pull the needle up. Watch it again. We're going to whip around the side of the fabric and poke the needle up through the fabric about a centimeter away from the last stitch. Whip around the side. Search with your needle to find the spot that's about a centimeter up from the last stitch and pull it through. Again, whip, whoosh, from the side, poke the needle up through the fabric. Keep repeating the whip stitch until your thread is as short as your hand. Then you need to tie it off, get a new thread, and keep sewing. Now we've learned 3 out of the 4 stitches that we're going to be learning, but since I have completed 3 sides of my sewing, it's time to take out the pins, put them back in their little container, and flip the pillow inside out. This is going to hide most of our stitches besides the whip stitch. The whip stitch is still very visible, and that's okay. That shows your hand as an artist. It shows that this pillow was hand sewn. So once your pillow has been flipped inside out, kind of like a sock, then you're ready to check out your stitching. Here's the whip stitch. It's the most visible, but again, that shows that this pillow was hand stitched, and that's really special. Before we close up the last side of our pillow, we need to get some stuffing and stuff the pillow to make it soft and fluffy. Take multiple handfuls of the stuffing and start in the back corners of the pillow. Make sure that those corners get nice and stuffed, and keep packing and filling until the whole pillow is very fluffy and soft. After your pillow is stuffed, we need to close up the final side. You might need to stuff the stuffing down deep into the pillow so that you can take the open end of the fabric and pin them together. We want the edge of this pillow to match up as we're sewing it, so we're going to need some more pins. Once the final side of your pillow is pinned up, of course, we need to get a fresh string and thread the needle, tie a knot on the other side, and get ready for our final stitching lesson. The final stitch we will be learning about is called a blanket stitch. With a threaded needle, pull the needle up through the fabric, and then, just like a whip stitch, whip around the side and poke through the bottom again. But instead of just pulling it all the way through like a normal whip stitch, before the loop disappears, we're going to take the needle and go through the loop. Then pull the loop tightly and you've completed a blanket stitch. Let's keep going and see it one more time. Start from the back of the fabric and push the needle through. Before pulling it all the way though, backtrack and put the needle through the loop that is created. Then pull tightly. To start the stitch again, start from the bottom of the fabric, push the needle up through about 1 centimeter away from the last stitch, and pull. Before the loop disappears, take your needle and jump through the loop. Then pull tightly and continue. Just remember to always start this stitch from underneath, and also make sure to keep your eye on your length of thread, because once it gets as short as your hand, you must stop, tie the knot on the last stitch, and re-thread your needle. So here I go, I've run out of thread, even though it doesn't seem like it. So I'm going to tuck my needle into the last stitch, and before the loop disappears, I'm going to go through the loop to tie a knot. Then I'm going to change directions and I'm going to put the needle through the opposite way I just went. Before that loop disappears though, I need to put my needle through, and that creates a knot. Now I'm ready to grab a new thread, re-thread my needle, and continue sewing my blanket stitch. Okay, once all 4 sides of your pillow are sewn together, we're done learning about stitches. What we're going to do next is sew a button in the center of the pillow. To do that, you're going to need a button and a threaded needle. But before we start to sew, double check that the needle will fit through the buttonholes. If the buttonholes are too small, we need to find a different button. When you're threading your needle to sew on the button, use the needle threader, and when you tie the knot at the other end of the string, make it a double knot this time. We're going to have to be pulling this thread pretty hard, and we don't want the knot to be too small and pull through the fabric. Once you have a threaded needle with a double knot at the other end, you are going to take your needle and poke it through the center of the pillow. Be very careful with your hand on the other side. Gently push the needle through both sides of the pillow. Don't try to go too fast or you might jab yourself and that hurts. Once you have your string through both sides of the pillow, including the stuffing, put the button through the needle to the bottom of the string like this. Now we're going to take our needle and we're going to dive through the second hole in the button. Your button might have 2 or 3 holes. It doesn't matter. Just find the other hole in the button that you haven't been through yet and poke it carefully, slowly through to the opposite side of the pillow. If you accidentally drop your thread out of your needle, just grab up your needle threader, re-thread it really quick, no worries. Now we're ready to go back up through the button side of the pillow. Again, we need to be really careful. We need to sew back in close to our other stitches, and we need to search with our needle to find a buttonhole. Remember, watch your fingers, don't jab it through the pillow because you don't know where it's coming out. You could jab your fingers and that would hurt. Once you've found the buttonhole, pull it tightly through and push down on the button to get the button closer to the other side. And poke the needle through very close to the previous stitches. Pull really tightly in order to create a divot where the button is. Every time you put in a new stitch, pull tightly so that the button becomes closer and closer to the other side. Let's put in a couple more stitches to make this button extra strong. We're going to search with our needle and find the buttonhole carefully without poking ourselves. Pull it through. Push the button down towards the other side as we tighten the string. And go back down through the other buttonhole, through to the other side. And we want our needle to be really close to the other stitches. Make sure that you do at least 5 stitches going around and around the button. And once you're done with that, make sure that your needle has finished stitching on the back side, the side without the button on it. Once your needle is out on the opposite side of the button, it's time to tie off this thread because I've done it about 5 times around the button and I'm ready to be done. So just like before when we were stitching the edges, we're going to take the needle and we're going to dive underneath one of the stitches on this back side. Once you're through the stitch, before you pull it all the way through, find the loop created and take your needle through it. Pull it tightly, and then repeat one more time for a double knot in the opposite direction. So I'm putting my needle through the last stitch in the opposite direction, and before I pull it through, I'm going to take the needle through the loop. Once I've got a double knot on my thread, I can grab some scissors and cut off the excess thread. And now you've sewn a pillow with a button. There's one more thing that we need to learn to do, and that is to create tassels. To make tassels, you will need a gift card or a piece of cardboard, 2 long pieces of yarn, and a skein of yarn. This is a skein of yarn. I'm sure you've seen one before. Maybe you didn't know what to call it. It's called a skein. And then you're going to take the gift card or cardboard. You're going to hold down the string onto it as you wrap the yarn around and around it about 20 times. After you've wrapped the yarn around the card or cardboard 20 times, grab some scissors and cut the yarn from the skein. And now for a pretty tricky part, which is to slide off the loops of yarn that you put around the card or the cardboard. I suggest slightly bending the card or cardboard so that you can slip off the loops of yarn and keep them in that loop. Keeping them in the loop, slide one of the long pieces of yarn that you have ready to go through the loop and double knot it very tightly. The trickiest part of making tassels is over because now the loop is going to stay where it is because of that yarn that we just tied. The next thing we need to do is lay out our second piece of long yarn, and we need to lay the loop of yarn on top of it. And near the top of the loops of yarn, near the place where you tied that first piece of yarn, we need to double knot the second 10-inch piece of yarn around the whole loop. Make sure to pull both of your knots very tightly so that your tassel doesn't fall apart. Once that's done, your tassel is almost ready, but first you need to pick up some scissors and cut the tassel open. So you'll slide the scissors into the loops of string and make sure to cut them all so that they're all opened up. And next you can give your tassel a little haircut. Don't go crazy with it because then you'll end up having no tassel because you cut them all off. But take your scissors and do a little trim to make sure that all of the yarn in the tassel is about the same length. For now, we're going to leave the long yarn at the top of the tassel just to keep the knot safe. And here you have it. Here's a little tassel ready to go, ready to be sewn onto our pillow, but we do need to make 3 more of them. So let's do that. Step 1 is to make sure that you have 2 long pieces of yarn ready to go. Then we need to wrap a cardboard or gift card 20 times around and around. Take the loop off of the cardboard and tie the loops securely with the long string. Next, we need to tie the second long piece of string near the top of the tassel, making sure to double knot to keep it all together. Lastly, we need to cut the tassel open by sliding our scissors into the loop and giving our tassel a small haircut. After you've made 4 tassels, 1 for each corner of your pillow, the last step of this entire project is to sew them on. We've done a lot of sewing so far, but in case you forgot, you're going to need to get a string, pull it out from the center of the bundle, thread your needle with a needle threader, and tie a knot on the other end. Once you're ready, find the corner of your pillow and start your needle from the bottom, going up. Pull the thread all the way through to the knot, and then pick up a tassel and slide the needle through the knot at the top of the tassel and pull it through. Now let's take our needle and dive back down through the corner of the pillow to the other side. Next, we need to search with our needle, poke up through the corner of the pillow, and once it's through, we need to find the knot of the tassel at the top once again and pull it through. To secure it, let's go one more time down through the pillow. Watch out for the strings of the tassel, especially the long ones. If the long strings at the top are getting in the way, you can cut them off close to the knot, but not on the knot so that the whole thing doesn't fall apart. I'm going to put in another stitch back through the knot in the tassel, and that should hold it securely. So I did 3 stitches to secure the tassel. Next, we need to tie off this thread. So we need to find the last stitch that we did right here, this little tiny one. And we're going to slide the needle through that stitch. Before we pull it all the way closed, we're going to put the needle through the loop that is created and pull it tightly. Then to double knot it, we're going to switch directions. We're going to go into the stitch from the opposite direction. And again, before we pull it all the way through and the loop disappears, we're going to pass our needle through the loop and then pull it tightly. Now we have one tassel attached, and we need to cut off this thread near the knot. If you haven't already, take the scissors once again and cut off the long strings at the tops of the tassels. Just be careful not to cut the knot at all. Just cut the string. So get close to the knot, but don't cut the knot. Now, I'm going to keep using the string that's through the needle already because it is long enough to use, but I need to remember to tie off the other end. Now it's time to sew on our second tassel. Remember, with a tied off needle, we are going to poke through from the back of the pillow right near the corner, and then pull the thread to the knot. Pick up the tassel and sew directly through the knot at the top of the tassel. Once it's poked through the knot, pull the tassel down towards the pillow. Now we need to take our needle and dive back down through the corner of this pillow to the other side. Next, we need to come up again through the corner of the pillow, search with the needle, and then we need to make sure that we catch the knot at the top of the tassel. Let's do one more stitch. As with all things sewing, we can't just leave this thread like it is. We need to tie it off. So we need to find the last stitch that we made. We need to put our needle through the stitch. Before pulling it all the way through, we need to back it up and weave the needle through the loop, pulling it tightly, and then repeat in the other direction to tie off the string. Now I've got half of my tassels sewn on. They look really cool. I'm going to make sure that I cut off the long strings from the top of the tassel without damaging the knot at the top. And I'm going to use a little bit of movie magic to speed things up and sew on these last 2 tassels. Well, this has been a long process, but we've made it through to the end. We have a beautiful Shibori dyed pillow, complete with a button and 4 handmade tassels. Now it's time to decide what you're going to do with this functional piece of art.